the strongest general in the Empire, activated a chamber designed to crush any life form. The human inside asked if this was supposed to be difficult. General Kravik stood in the observation deck of the Imperial warship Dominator, all 7 feet of chiseled blue-scaled muscle radiating the kind of confidence that comes from never losing a fight. And I mean never. 347 combat engagements across 62 star systems, and the guy hadn't so much as lost his footing. The Zelathor Empire didn't hand out the Crimson Star of Valor like party favors, but Kravik, he had 9 of them bolted directly into his exoskeleton. Yes, bolted. Because when you're that much of a badass, apparently pinning medals to your uniform is for amateur. The general flexed one of his forearms, watching the synthetic lighting gleam off his scales. Zelathor physiology was the stuff of legend, really. Dense muscle fibers that could snap titanium cables, bone structure reinforced with natural calcium carbide compounds, and a cardiovascular system that pumped liquid that was basically high-octane fuel. Evolution had spent millions of years turning his species into the galaxy's premier warrior. They were born on Zelathor Prime, a world with 0.93 standard gravity, temperate climates, and absolutely nothing trying to kill you before breakfast. Paradise, really. A civilized world for a civilized superior species, which made the current situation so incredibly frustratingly absurd. Kravik glared at the datapad in his lower left hand, reading the report for the 5th time, hoping the words would somehow rearrange themselves into something that made sense. 3 of his forward battalion's elite shock troopers who had crushed the Mantix rebellion in under a week had been defeated by a human patrol unit, not just defeated, routed, sent running back to their dropships like fresh recruits facing their first combat drone. The humans had been outnumbered 4-1. They should have been vapor. Instead, his troops were in medical bay and the humans had captured one of his officers without breaking a sweat. Humans. Those soft pink 5-fingered freaks from some nowhere planet called Earth. A species so new to the galactic stage that most of the Empire's databases still listed them under uncontacted primitives. Pending classification. They looked like they'd been assembled from spare parts. No scales, no proper claws, no redundant organs. Just squishy skin and those weird, unsettling eyes that moved independently of their heads. And yet, somehow, they were embarrassing his finest soldier. The door to the observation deck hissed open, and Commander Vex entered, his scales a darker shade of blue that indicated his junior status. He saluted with all 4 arms, which Kravik thought was a bit excessive, but Vex had always been a kiss-up. General, the human prisoner has been secured in holding Bay 7, sir. Awaiting your orders. Kravik's mandibles clicked together in what passed for a Zelathor smile. Finally, a chance to understand what made these creatures so dangerous, but more importantly, a chance to prove that whatever temporary advantage they'd gained was nothing compared to true Zelathor superiority. He'd spent the last 6 hours formulating a plan, and it was, if he did say so himself, brilliant in its simplicity. Prepare the gravity chamber, Kravik ordered, his voice resonating with authority. Set it for progressive escalation protocols. Vex's eyes widened slightly. Sir? The chamber is designed for advanced conditioning of our elite forces. Are you certain you want to subject a prisoner to— I'm going to show this human exactly where it stands in the hierarchy of the universe, Kravik interrupted, cracking his knuckles on all 4 hands simultaneously, a move he'd been practicing because it looked incredibly intimidating. These creatures think they're warriors. I'll demonstrate what real strength looks like. We'll start at standard Zelathor gravity and work our way up. When this human is crushed into paste at 5 times standard, maybe the rest of its species will learn some respect. Vex hesitated, then nodded. As you command, General. Should I alert medical staff to stand by? Oh, absolutely, Kravik said, turning back to the viewport where the stars streaked past. They're going to need to scrape what's left of our guest off the floor. And Vex? Make sure we record everything. I want every ship in the fleet to see what happens when you challenge the Zelathor Empire. What Kravik didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, was that he was about to have the single most educational, humiliating and reality-shattering experience of his entire military career. But hey, ignorance is bliss, right? And right now, General Kravik was absolutely blissful. The gravity chamber was located in the ship's central training complex, a massive spherical room about 50 meters in diameter with walls made of some kind of energy-absorbing alloy that could withstand, well, pretty much anything short of a supernova. The floor was marked with concentric circles indicating different test zones, and along the curved walls monitoring stations blinked with readouts that measured everything from atmospheric pressure to bone density stress factors. Overhead, the gravity generators hummed with barely contained power, capable of producing up to 25 times standard galactic gravity. It was where Zelathor warriors came to push themselves beyond normal limits. to train until their bodies adapted to forces that would crush lesser species into jelly. Kravik stood in the center circle, arms crossed, waiting. He'd stripped down to his combat shorts because if he was going to teach this human a lesson, he wanted it to see exactly what peak physical conditioning looked like. His scales gleamed under the harsh training lights, each muscle group clearly defined. He'd run this chamber hundreds of times, had maxed out at 18 times standard gravity for a full hour, 18 times, the record for any species in the known galaxy. He was basically a living legend, and this was going to be educational. The entrance portal dilated, and 2 guards escorted the human inside. Kravik's first thought was, that's it? That's what defeated 3 battalions? Lieutenant Jackson Cole was by Zilithor standards embarrassingly average, maybe 6 feet tall, which was short by any reasonable measure. His build was lean, not bulky, with none of the obvious musculature that screamed warrior. He had brown hair that looked like it hadn't seen a proper grooming station in weeks, and his skin was this weird peachy tan color that seemed way too fragile for someone who supposedly fought for a living. He wore a gray prisoner's jumpsuit that hung loosely on his frame, and his hands, those 5-fingered appendages, weren't even restrained. The guards had apparently decided he wasn't threatening enough to warrant binding. Cole looked around the chamber with mild interest, like he'd just walked into a moderately impressive gym, not a facility designed to test the limits of biological endurance. His eyes, those strange forward-facing brown eyes, settled on Kravik, and the human smiled. Actually smiled. So, Cole said, his voice carrying that weird musical quality human speech had, all vowels and soft consonants. I'm guessing this isn't the recreational facility. Kravik's mandibles twitched. The human was making jokes. Perfect. He gestured to the monitoring station where Vex and 3 other officers had gathered, their recording devices activated. Lieutenant Cole, is it? I am General Kravik of the Zilithor Imperial Guard. You and your kind have caused considerable trouble for my forces. Before we proceed with formal interrogation, I thought a simple demonstration might help you understand your position. Cole raised one eyebrow, a gesture Kravik found oddly expressive for a species with such limited facial features. A demonstration? Is this like a welcome orientation? Do I get a pamphlet? The sarcasm was not lost on Kravik, which only made this more satisfying. This chamber can generate up to 25 times standard galactic gravity. I thought we might test your endurance, see exactly how tough humans really are, unless of course you'd prefer to concede now and save yourself the pain. Cole glanced up at the gravity generators, then back at Kravik. He shrugged, shoving his hands into his jumpsuit pockets like he was waiting for a bus. Sure, why not? I've got time. Fair warning though, General. I skipped my morning workout, so I might be a little stiff. Kravik's confidence soared. The human thought this was a joke. Oh, this was going to be delicious. He nodded to Vex. Start the sequence. Standard progression, 1.2-second intervals between increases. Engaging gravity systems now, sir, Vex announced, his claws dancing over the controls. Starting at 1 time standard. May the ancestors guide you both. Kravik grinned, showing all his teeth. This human was about to learn a very painful lesson about exactly where it ranked in the universal food chain. Spoiler alert, the lesson wasn't going to go the way Kravik expected. Not even close. The gravity generators activated with a low thrum that Kravik felt in his chest plates. 1 time standard galactic gravity, 0.93 Gs by Earth measurement, though of course Kravik had no idea about that particular conversion. This was baseline, the comfortable zone where most civilized species operated. Kravik stood easily, his natural physiology more than adequate for this level. He'd been born and raised in slightly less, so this felt like wearing a comfortable weight vest. Cole didn't even blink. Just stood there, hands still in his pockets, looking around like he was touring a museum. So, do we just stand here? Or is there like a routine? Jumping jacks? Squats? I'm not really clear on the format. Kravik frowned. The human should be feeling at least some strain. This is 1 time standard. How do you feel? Fine, Cole replied, tilting his head. Should I not feel fine? Is something supposed to be happening? We are just beginning, human. Patience. Kravik nodded to Vex. Increased to 2 time standard. The hum deepened. Kravik felt the familiar pull, like someone had draped a heavy blanket across his shoulders. His muscles engaged automatically, compensating for the increased load. At 2 times standard, movement became deliberate. You could still function normally, but everything required just a bit more effort. Breathing took more work. Standing required active muscle engagement. This was where most species started to struggle. Cole rolled his shoulders, rotated his neck until it made a small popping sound that honestly sounded kind of disturbing, and yawned. Is it getting warmer in here or is that just me? Wait, what? Kravik stared at the human. Warmer. The temperature hadn't changed. The human should be concentrating on staying upright, not commenting on climate control. You feel no increased pressure? Oh sure, a little, Cole said, pulling one hand out of his pocket to scratch his chin. Kind of like wearing a backpack, I guess. Nothing major. Nothing major. 2 times standard gravity. And this human described it like carrying luggage. Kravik's confidence flickered. Just slightly. Maybe the human was posturing, trying to hide discomfort. Yes, that had to be it. Pride before a fall and all that. Let us continue. Increase to 3 times standard. The gravity doubled down again. Now Kravik really felt it. 3 times standard was serious business. His breathing became measured, controlled. Each movement required thought and intention. His cardiovascular system kicked into high gear, pumping harder to fight against the downward pull. This was advanced training territory. Most Zelathor soldiers couldn't maintain 3 times standard for more than 30 minutes without serious fatigue. Cole bent down, and for a moment Kravik thought, here it comes. The human is going to collapse, but no. Cole was tying his shoe. The human had crouched down in 3 times standard gravity to tie his shoe like he was standing in a park somewhere. He straightened up without even using his hands for balance. You know, Cole said, conversationally, I once had a drill sergeant who made us do obstacle courses in full gear during monsoon season. Now that was uncomfortable. This is kind of like standing in an elevator that's going down. Weird sensation but manageable. What in the name of the ancestors was this human made of? Kravik's mind raced. Maybe humans had some kind of internal support structure he wasn't aware of. Or perhaps they were cybernetically enhanced. That had to be it. Are you augmented human? Mechanical enhancements. Cole looked genuinely offended. What? No. This is all factory original, buddy. Why am I supposed to be struggling or something? Most species cannot function at this level without significant training, Kravik said, trying to keep the irritation out of his voice. He was starting to sweat now, just slightly, tiny droplets forming between his scales. Huh, Cole said. Weird. So are we going higher, or is this it? Because if we're stopping here I should probably mention I'm getting kind of bored. Bored. The human was bored. At 3 times standard gravity. Kravik's pride, that magnificent undefeated pride, suddenly felt a lot less secure. But he wasn't about to back down. Not in front of his officers. Not in front of the cameras. And certainly not in front of this smug, pink, impossibly casual human. Increased to 4 times standard. The chamber groaned as the generators ramped up again. 4 times. This was elite territory. Kravik's legs trembled slightly, his muscles burning as they fought to keep him upright. His breathing was labored now, each inhale a conscious effort. Standing still was a workout. This was where warriors were forged, where the weak were separated from the strong. Cole stretched his arms over his head, interlacing his fingers and pushing upward until his shoulders popped. Oh, that's better. I had a crick in my back from sleeping on that cell bunk. Your prison beds are terrible, by the way. Just absolutely no lumbar support. The human was using 4 times standard gravity as physical therapy. Kravik felt something unfamiliar creeping up his spine. It felt suspiciously like doubt. Fine, Kravik growled, his voice strained. 5 times standard. Surely you will feel this. 5 times hit like a hammer. Kravik's knees nearly buckled. His exoskeleton creaked under the pressure. Every breath was a battle. Every heartbeat a struggle. His vision narrowed slightly as his body diverted resources to essential functions. This was his operational limit for extended periods. Beyond this, and he'd be risking serious physiological damage. Cole did a few casual toe touches, bending at the waist and straightening up like he was warming up for a light jog. Okay, yeah. Now I'm definitely feeling it. This is like wearing a weighted vest. Good core workout. And that's when Kravik realized he might have made a terrible, terrible mistake. Kravik's pride was a stubborn thing, forged in 3 centuries of victories and reinforced by an ego the size of a small moon. So naturally, instead of doing the sensible thing and admitting that maybe, just maybe, he'd underestimated the human, he doubled down. 6 times standard. Engage. The gravity slammed down like the fist of an angry god. Kravik's legs locked, his knees threatening to give out entirely. Sweat poured down his scales now, running in rivulets between the plates of his exoskeleton. His hearts, both of them hammered against his ribcage so hard he could hear them. Every muscle in his body screamed in protest. This was beyond training. This was survival. He forced himself to remain standing through sheer willpower and a desperate refusal to show weakness. Cole rocked back and forth on his heels, hands clasped behind his back, looking around the chamber with tourist-level interest. So, how long have you guys had this facility? The engineering is pretty solid. We've got something similar back on Earth, but ours is more compact, different design philosophy, I guess. You, Kravik gasped, his voice barely above a wheeze. You are talking. How are you talking? I mean, I've got lungs and a larynx and everything, Cole replied cheerfully. Standard human equipment. Are you okay, General? You're looking a little blue. Well, bluer than normal. Is that bad for your species? From the observation deck, Commander Vex leaned toward Junior Officer Talus, his voice a harsh whisper. Is the human actually making conversation? At 6 times standard? Talus, whose scales had gone pale with shock, could only nod mutely. His datapad trembled in his claws as he recorded the impossible scene before them. Sir, according to our scans, the human's heart rate has elevated by approximately 20%. That's nothing. At 6 times standard, the General's heart rate is up 140%. This makes no sense, Vex hissed. Humans are supposed to be weak. They have no natural armor, no redundant organ systems, no environmental adaptations. They're from some backwater planet nobody cares about. Clearly, Talus said quietly. Somebody should have cared. Back in the chamber, Kravik was having what could only be described as a moment of crisis. His entire worldview, carefully constructed over decades of military dominance, was crumbling faster than a sandcastle in a tsunami. But he was General Kravik, holder of 9 crimson stars, and he would rather die than quit. 7 times standard, he croaked. The universe pressed down with crushing force. Kravik dropped to one knee, unable to maintain his standing position. His arms shook with the effort of keeping himself from pancaking completely. Breathing was agony. His vision swam. This was it. This was his absolute limit. One knee was all he could manage. And even that felt like bench lifting a transport ship. Cole shifted his weight from one foot to the other. You know what this reminds me of? Basic training first week. They had us doing flutter kicks for like an hour straight. Thought I was gonna die. But you adapt, right? Body's pretty good at figuring things out. How? Kravik managed. Each word a monumental effort. Are you standing? Well, I'm using my legs primarily, Cole said, with the kind of helpful tone you'd use to explain something to a child. Skeletal structure takes most of the load. Muscles provide stabilization. Pretty standard bipedal mechanics. Want me to go through the biomechanics? I'm not an expert, but I paid attention in high school biology. High school biology. The human had learned to withstand 7 times standard gravity in high school biology. Kravik wanted to scream, but he didn't have the lung capacity. Sir, Vex's voice crackled through the comm, heavy with concern. Your vitals are approaching critical levels. We should terminate the test. No, Kravik snarled, or tried to. It came out more like a wheeze. 8 times. Do it. The gravity increased. Kravik collapsed fully, both knees and one hand on the floor, his body forcing itself into a more stable position. His exoskeleton creaked ominously. His scales felt like they might crack. This was beyond anything he'd ever experienced. This was what it felt like to have a planet sitting on your chest. Cole walked over, his footsteps surprisingly light despite the insane gravitational force. He squatted down next to Kravik, balancing easily on the balls of his feet. Hey, General, you look like you're having a rough time. We can stop if you want. No judgment. The human was squatting, voluntarily, in 8 times standard gravity, and offering Kravik a way out with the casual kindness of someone suggesting a break during a workout. Continue, Kravik gasped, pride overriding every survival instinct he possessed. Your funeral, Cole said with a shrug, standing back up. Well, not literally. Probably. I'm not a doctor. 9 times standard. Kravik was flat on the floor now, spread eagle, unable to move anything except his eyes. His breathing came in short, desperate gasps. He couldn't feel his extremities. His vision tunneled to a narrow point. Somewhere in the distance, alarms were blaring, medical warnings screaming about organ stress and skeletal fracture risks. Cole did a few lunges, alternating legs. Man, I should do this more often. Really feel the burn, you know? 10 times standard. Kravik couldn't even speak anymore. He could only watch in horror and awe as the human started doing push-ups. Actual push-ups. In 10 times galactic standard gravity, the soft slap of Cole's hands on the floor echoed through the chamber like a countdown to Kravik's complete psychological breakdown. 13, 14, 15. Cole counted cheerfully. I'm shooting for 20. Gotta maintain fitness standards even in captivity. On the observation deck, Junior Officer Talus turned to Commander Vex, his voice hollow with shock. Sir, I think we may have severely miscalculated our threat assessment of humanity. You think? Vex snapped. watching their legendary undefeated general get absolutely humiliated by a creature doing calisthenics. Kravik, pinned to the floor like an insect in a collection, had one coherent thought left. What kind of hellish nightmare planet creates a species that treats 10 times standard gravity as a light workout? He was about to find out. And honestly, he really wasn't going to like the answer. Somewhere in the rational part of Kravik's brain, the part not drowning in humiliation and oxygen deprivation, a small voice was screaming at him to stop. This was insane. He was going to kill himself. Medical protocol clearly stated that Zilithor physiology began experiencing irreversible damage beyond 12 times standard gravity. His bones could fracture, his hearts could rupture, his organs could literally collapse under their own weight. But that voice was drowned out by a much louder one. The voice of wounded pride, of shattered ego, of 300 years of military dominance circling the drain. That voice said, "Keep going. Make the human break. Prove you're superior. Die if you have to. But die proving you're better than this pink squishy abomination." 11. Kravik wheezed into the floor, each syllable taking 5 seconds to force out. Times. Standard. Sir. Absolutely not, Vex shouted through the comm. Abandoning all protocol. You'll die. We're terminating the test immediately. Override. Kravik gasped. Generals. Authority. Do it. The gravity hammered down. Kravik felt something crack in his lower spine. Pain exploded through his nervous system like wildfire. His scales, those beautiful blue scales he'd been so proud of, began splitting at the seams. Purple blood oozed from the fractures pooling on the floor beneath him. His vision went gray at the edges. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could barely process anything except the crushing, overwhelming weight of 11 times what his body was designed to handle. Through the haze of agony, he watched Cole finish his push-ups and transition into a stretching routine. The human sat on the floor, legs spread in a V-shape and bent forward to touch his toes, holding the position for a 10 count before switching sides. "You really should stretch more, General," Cole said, his voice slightly strained but still conversational. "Flexibility is super important, prevents injuries. My unit commander always said a flexible soldier is a surviving soldier." Kravik tried to respond, but all that came out was a gurgling sound as one of his lungs partially collapsed. "Medical team to the gravity chamber immediately." Talus barked into his communicator, his professional composure completely shattered. "The general is experiencing critical system failure." "Belay that order," Kravik somehow managed to rasp, using emergency combat breathing techniques designed for wounded soldiers. 12 times. "General, you're dying," Vex pleaded, his voice cracking with genuine fear. "Then I'll die." "Right. Increase gravity." The number 12 flickered on the displays. Kravik screamed. Actually screamed. The sound that came from his throat was something primal, the sound of a body being pushed so far beyond its limits that every cell was in revolt. His exoskeleton buckled, his secondary heart stuttered, missing beats, blood vessels burst in his eyes, turning his vision red. And through it all, through the worst pain he'd ever experienced in 3 centuries of warfare, he watched Lieutenant Jackson Cole stand up, shake out his legs, and start doing neck rolls. "Okay, yeah, this is getting heavy," Cole admitted, rolling his shoulders. "Definitely feeling this one. Good workout though. Really good." 13 times. Kravik couldn't scream anymore, couldn't move, couldn't do anything except exist in a state of pure, transcendent agony. His brain was shutting down non-essential functions. His body was eating itself, trying to find energy to keep vital organs functioning. He was, by any reasonable medical definition, dying. Cole dropped into a lunge position, stretching his quadriceps. "You know, I did a tour on a high-G colony once. Research station on a planet with about 1.4 Earth gravities. Everybody complained for the first month, but you adapt. Human bodies are weird like that." 14 times. Kravik's consciousness flickered. He was hallucinating now, seeing his ancestors standing around shaking their heads in disappointment. One of them, his great-grandfather, a legendary warrior in his own right, looked down at him with disgust. "You got beaten by a creature doing yoga." Hallucination, great-grandfather said. "The family name is ruined." 15 times. Someone was crying. Kravik dimly realized it was him. Tears mixed with blood on the floor. His forearms were completely useless, splayed out like dead weight. His legs had gone numb. He was pretty sure his pelvis had fractured. Death was starting to look appealing. At least in death he wouldn't have to watch this human treat 15 times standard gravity like a moderately challenging Pilates class. Cole was doing standing quad stretches now, pulling one foot up behind him, balancing on the other leg, in 15 times standard gravity. balancing on one leg. 16. Kravik whispered, more prayer than command. Sir. No. Multiple voices screamed through the comm simultaneously. Do it. 16 times. Kravik's consciousness was a flickering candle in a hurricane. He existed only as pain and regret. Every molecule of his being screamed for release. His genetic ancestors who'd crawled out of the primordial seas of Zelathor Prime millions of years ago were collectively rolling in their evolutionary graves. Cole sat down cross-legged, apparently meditating. This is actually pretty nice. Feels like a weighted blanket. Very calming. 17 times. Kravik's brain began experiencing micro-seizures. His nervous system was firing randomly, sending contradictory signals to muscles that could no longer respond. He was, medically speaking, a disaster, a cautionary tale, a warning about what happens when ego writes checks your body can't cash. 18 times. This was Kravik's record, the number he'd been so proud of, the benchmark of Zelathor superiority. He'd maintained 18 times for a full hour once, barely, with every medical support system active. He'd been at 18 times for approximately 4 seconds, and he was pretty sure his soul was trying to evacuate his body. Cole yawned. Not a small yawn. Not a polite cover-your-mouth yawn. A full jaw-cracking, eye-watering, absolutely bored out of my mind yawn. At 18 times standard gravity. Sorry, Cole said, covering his mouth belatedly. Didn't sleep great last night. Your cells are really uncomfortable. Already mentioned that, but bears repeating. 19 times. Kravik was seeing colors that didn't exist, hearing sounds from dimensions that shouldn't be accessible. His consciousness had detached from his body and was floating somewhere near the ceiling, looking down at the broken shell that used to be a proud warrior. Cole checked his fingernails, apparently finding something interesting there. 20. Kravik's body whispered, though his consciousness was no longer controlling it. This was pure autonomy now, the last firing of synapses in a brain that had given up on rational thought. 20 times standard gravity activated. The observation deck was silent except for the blaring medical alarms and someone quietly sobbing. Cole settled into a comfortable sitting position, rested his chin on his hands and yawned again. Longer this time, more pronounced. The kind of yawn you do when you're waiting for a boring meeting to end. At 20 times galactic standard gravity. In that moment, as Kravik's fragmenting consciousness watched a human yawn with the weight of 20 planets pressing down on him, something fundamental broke in the general's understanding of the universe. Everything he'd believed, everything he'd known about strength and evolution and the natural order of species, shattered like glass. The humans weren't lucky. They weren't using tricks or technology or enhancement. They were just built different. And Kravik, greatest warrior of the Zelathor Empire, had just learned that lesson in the most painful, humiliating way possible. The last thing he saw before his consciousness finally gave up and shut down completely was Cole doing another series of neck stretches, looking mildly inconvenienced at worst. Then, mercifully, everything went black. Kravik woke up in medical bay 3 hours later, his body encased in a regeneration pod that was working overtime to repair the catastrophic damage he'd inflicted on himself. Every part of him hurt. Parts he didn't even know could hurt were sending pain signals to his brain. His pride hurt most of all, which was saying something considering his spine had been fractured in 4 places. Through the translucent cover of the pod he could see Commander Vex standing vigil, along with the entire medical staff who were monitoring his vitals with the intensity usually reserved for keeping dying royalty alive. When Kravik's eyes opened, Vex's expression shifted from concern to something that looked suspiciously like relief mixed with secondhand embarrassment. "General," Vex said carefully, "you're awake. The doctors say you'll make a full recovery in approximately 6 weeks. You're extremely fortunate. Another 30 seconds at 20 times standard and we'd be having a very different conversation." Kravik's mandibles clicked weakly. "The human? Perfectly fine, sir." He walked out of the gravity chamber under his own power, complimented the facility design, and asked if we had any coffee. We didn't know what coffee was, so he explained it's a stimulant beverage from Earth. Then he requested a protein bar and returned to his cell for a nap. Of course he did. Of course the human walked away fine and took a nap. Kravik would have laughed if his ribs weren't held together with medical adhesive and hope. "Bring him here," Kravik rasped. "I need answers." 20 minutes later, Lieutenant Jackson Cole stood beside the regeneration pod, hands in his jumpsuit pockets, looking genuinely concerned. "Hey, General, you okay? That looked really rough back there. I tried to warn you." "How?" Kravik asked simply. It was all he had the energy for. Cole scratched the back of his head, looking almost embarrassed. "Oh man. Yeah, I guess we should probably talk about that. So, Earth, my home planet, It's got about 1.0 standard G. I know that doesn't sound like much more than your world, but here's the thing. It's not just the gravity. He pulled over a medical stool and sat down, apparently settling in for story time. Earth is what we call a death world. Everything there is trying to kill you. The weather swings from boiling to freezing. We've got storms that can level cities, earthquakes that crack continents, volcanoes that block out the sun. Our atmosphere used to be toxic until plants spent millions of years converting it. We've got predators with teeth the size of your hand, prey animals that can trample you flat, and microorganisms that can drop you in hours. Vex, who'd been listening from the doorway, stepped closer. Surely you're exaggerating. I really wish I was, Cole said with a laugh that held no humor. Humans evolved on a planet that's basically a nightmare difficulty setting. To survive, we had to become adaptable. Our cardiovascular system is insanely efficient because we used to chase prey for hours until they literally died of exhaustion. Our bone density is ridiculous because we needed to absorb impact from running, jumping, and falling. Our muscle fiber composition gives us this crazy combination of endurance and explosive strength. He gestured vaguely at himself. We're persistence predators from a high-gravity death world. That's not special forces training, General. That's just baseline human. Every human. The old ones, the young ones, the ones who've never seen combat. We're all walking around in bodies designed to survive apocalypse-level conditions as a daily dater. Kravik felt something cold settle in his stomach. The 1.0 gravity. Yeah, Cole nodded. 1 Earth gravity is 1.073 galactic standard. Doesn't seem like much, right? But we've been living in that our entire evolutionary history. Millions of years of adaptation. What you experienced at 20 times standard. That's about 18.6 Earth gravities. Uncomfortable for me. Absolutely. Painful. Getting there. Fatal. Not even close. The medical bay was dead silent. Our basic training, Cole continued, almost apologetically, involves running obstacle courses while carrying 60 pounds of gear in 1.07 Earth G. We do it for hours. Our athletes train in enhanced gravity chambers to improve performance. Our soldiers operate in combat armor that weighs 200 pounds. This isn't bragging, General. This is just what we are. Talus, who'd been recording everything on his datapad, looked up with wide eyes. How many of you are there? Humans? Oh, about 10 billion, give or take. Most of us haven't even left Earth. The ones you've been fighting, those are just the Explorer Corps and Colonial Marines. Maybe a few 100,000 people total. Ancestors preserve us, Vex whispered. Cole stood up, stretching his back. Look, I'm sorry about what happened in there. I really did try to tell you to stop. But I think there's a bigger conversation we need to have about this war you guys started. Because if you think I'm impressive, wait until you meet our actual soldiers, the ones who train for this. I'm just a scout lieutenant. I fix communication arrays and map terrain. I'm the guy they send to check if a planet has decent soil. He looked down at Kravik with something that might have been sympathy. The heavy infantry, the shock troopers, the special operations teams. General, those people are scary, and there's millions of them. Kravik closed his eyes, the full weight of the revelation crushing him more thoroughly than 20 times gravity ever could. The Zelithor Empire, dominant military power of the galaxy, had picked a fight with a species that considered surviving on their own planet a baseline achievement. They hadn't captured an elite warrior. They'd captured a gardener with a gun, and he'd nearly killed himself trying to prove superiority. Commander Vex, Kravik said quietly, his voice hoarse. Prepare a priority communication to Imperial Command. Classification level critical. Sir? Tell them. Kravik swallowed his pride, his ego, and every assumption he'd ever made about the natural order of the universe. We need to negotiate a ceasefire. Immediately. Before we make this situation any worse. Cole gave him a small understanding nod. Probably a smart call, General. Probably a smart call. Kravik woke up in medical bay 3 hours later, his body encased in a regeneration pod that was working overtime to repair the catastrophic damage he'd inflicted on himself. Every part of him hurt. Parts he didn't even know could hurt were sending pain signals to his brain. His pride hurt most of all, which was saying something considering his spine had been fractured in 4 places. Through the translucent cover of the pod, he could see Commander Vex standing vigil, along with the entire medical staff who were monitoring his vitals with the intensity usually reserved for keeping dying royalty alive. When Kravik's eyes opened, Vex's expression shifted from concern to something that looked suspiciously like relief mixed with second-hand embarrassment. General, Vex said carefully, you're awake. The doctors say you'll make a full recovery in approximately 6 weeks. You're extremely fortunate. Another 30 seconds at 20 times standard and we'd be having a very different conversation. Kravik's mandibles clicked weakly. The human. Perfectly fine, sir. He walked out of the gravity chamber under his own power, complimented the facility design, and asked if we had any coffee. We didn't know what coffee was, so he explained it's a stimulant beverage from Earth. Then he requested a protein bar and returned to his cell for a nap. Of course he did. Of course the human walked away fine and took a nap. Kravik would have laughed if his ribs weren't held together with medical adhesive and hope. Bring him here, Kravik rasped. I need answers. 20 minutes later, Lieutenant Jackson Cole stood beside the regeneration pod, hands in his jumpsuit pockets, looking genuinely concerned. Hey, General. You okay? That looked really rough back there. I tried to warn you. How? Kravik asked simply. It was all he had the energy for. Cole scratched the back of his head, looking almost embarrassed. Oh man. Yeah, I guess we should probably talk about that. So, Earth, my home planet, it's got about 1.0 standard G. I know that doesn't sound like much more than your world, but here's the thing. It's not just the gravity. He pulled over a medical stool and sat down, apparently settling in for story time. Earth is what we call a death world. Everything there is trying to kill you. The weather swings from boiling to freezing. We've got storms that can level cities, earthquakes that crack continents, volcanoes that block out the sun. Our atmosphere used to be toxic until plants spent millions of years converting it. We've got predators with teeth the size of your hand, prey animals that can trample you flat, and microorganisms that can drop you in hours. Vex, who'd been listening from the doorway, stepped closer. Surely you're exaggerating. I really wish I was, Cole said with a laugh that held no humor. Humans evolved on a planet that's basically a nightmare difficulty setting. To survive, we had to become adaptable. Our cardiovascular system is insanely efficient because we used to chase prey for hours until they literally died of exhaustion. Our bone density is ridiculous because we needed to absorb impact from running, jumping, and falling. Our muscle fiber composition gives us this crazy combination of endurance and explosive strength. He gestured vaguely at himself. We're persistence predators from a high-gravity death world. That's not special forces training, General. That's just baseline human. Every human. The old ones, the young ones, the ones who've never seen combat. We're all walking around in bodies designed to survive apocalypse-level conditions as a daily standard. Kravik felt something cold settle in his stomach. The 1.0 gravity. Yeah, Cole nodded. 1 Earth gravity is 1.073 galactic standard. Doesn't seem like much, right? But we've been living in that our entire evolutionary history. Millions of years of adaptation. What you experienced at 20 times standard, that's about 18.6 Earth gravities. Uncomfortable for me. Absolutely. Painful. Getting there. Fatal. Not even close. The medical bay was dead silent. Our basic training, Cole continued, almost apologetically, involves running obstacle courses while carrying 60 pounds of gear in 1.07 Earth G. We do it for hours. Our athletes train in enhanced gravity chambers to improve performance. Our soldiers operate in combat armor that weighs 200 pounds. This isn't bragging, General. This is just what we are. Talus, who'd been recording everything on his datapad, looked up with wide eyes. How many of you are there? Humans? Oh, about 10 billion, give or take. Most of us haven't even left Earth. The ones you've been fighting? Those are just the Explorer Corps and Colonial Marines. Maybe a few 100,000 people total. Ancestors preserve us, Vex whispered. Cole stood up, stretching his back. Look, I'm sorry about what happened in there. I really did try to tell you to stop, but I think there's a bigger conversation we need to have about this war you guys started, because if you think I'm impressive, wait until you meet our actual soldiers, the ones who train for this. I'm just a scout lieutenant. I fix communication arrays and map terrain. I'm the guy they send to check if a planet has decent soil. He looked down at Kravik with something that might have been sympathy. The heavy infantry, the shock troopers, the special operations teams. General, those people are scary, and there's millions of them. Kravik closed his eyes, the full weight of the revelation crushing him more thoroughly than 20 times gravity ever could. The Zelathor Empire, dominant military power of the galaxy, had picked a fight with a species that considered surviving on their own planet a baseline achievement. They hadn't captured an elite warrior, they'd captured a gardener with a gun. And he'd nearly killed himself trying to prove superiority. Commander Vex, Kravik said quietly, his voice hoarse, prepare a priority communication to Imperial Command, classification level critical. Sir? Tell them. Kravik swallowed his pride, his ego and every assumption he'd ever made about the natural order of the universe. We need to negotiate a ceasefire, immediately, before we make this situation any worse. Cole gave him a small understanding nod. Probably a smart call, General. Probably a smart call. The holographic transmission chamber flickered to life 3 days later, projecting the stern faces of the Zilithor High Command across 6 floating screens. Kravik stood at attention, still moving stiffly from his injuries, his scales freshly polished to hide the lingering cracks. Pride was one thing, duty was another. Supreme Commander Thexvor, oldest and most decorated of the Council, leaned forward in his projection. General Kravik, your report claims we should immediately cease all hostilities with the humans and open diplomatic channels. Explain. Kravik had rehearsed this moment 100 times. He'd prepared eloquent speeches about strategic reassessment and tactical considerations. But in the end he went with the truth. Honored commanders, we classified humanity based on incomplete data. They are not a typical species. They are Deathworlders. The council members exchanged glances. Commander Thexvor's mandibles clicked in dismissal. 1.0 standard gravity hardly qualifies as a Deathworld, General. Their planet is barely different from ours. With respect, sir, that measurement doesn't capture the reality. I tested one of their soldiers, a junior officer, in progressive gravity scenarios. He remained functional at 20 times standard. I collapsed at 11 and nearly died. The silence that followed was profound. That's impossible, someone whispered. I have full recordings, Kravik continued. The human explained their evolutionary history. They're persistence predators from a planet with extreme environmental volatility. High gravity is their baseline. Their entire species is adapted for conditions we would classify as torture. And sirs, the individual we tested wasn't even a combat specialist. He was a reconnaissance scout. Their actual warriors are significantly more capable. Counselor Vexit, the military strategist, pulled up data on her screen. How many combat-ready humans exist? Conservative estimates suggest several hundred million, with billions in reserve. They have barely begun expanding beyond their home system. The council chamber erupted in overlapping voices, all variations of panic and disbelief. Kravik waited for the chaos to subside before delivering the final piece of information, the one that had kept him awake every night since his humiliation. There's one more thing, honored commanders. Lieutenant Cole mentioned that human children, their younglings, play games in their standard gravity for fun. Games that involve running, jumping, and constant physical exertion, what we would consider advanced military conditioning. They teach to adolescents in educational facilities. He paused, letting that sink in. We attempted to conquer a species whose children train harder than our elite forces, as a daily recreational activity. Supreme Commander Thexvor sat back heavily in his chair, looking every one of his 200 years. Draft the ceasefire proposal, General. And someone get me everything we have on Earth's gravitational specifications. I want to know exactly what kind of monsters we've been shooting at. Kravik allowed himself the smallest smile. Monsters. That was one word for them. 6 weeks later, after the ceasefire had been signed and Lieutenant Cole had been returned to human space as a gesture of goodwill, Kravik received a package. Inside was a handwritten note, and a peculiar black beverage container labeled coffee. The note read, General, thanks for the workout. If you ever want a rematch, look me up, but maybe start with some stretches first. Stay flexible out there. Jackson Cole. P.S. The coffee is from Earth. Fair warning, it's strong enough to wake the dead. Seemed appropriate. Kravik opened the container and took a cautious sip. His eyes widened. The beverage was bitter, intense, and hit his system like a chemical weapon. It was awful. It was perfect. It was exactly what he'd expect from a species that evolved drinking liquid energy on a death world. He took another sip and began drafting new training protocols for Zilithor forces. If humans considered this normal, then normal needed to be redefined. The galaxy had changed. The hierarchy had shifted. And General Kravik, for the first time in 300 years, felt like a student again. Somewhere in human space, Lieutenant Jackson Cole was probably doing push-ups and complaining about uncomfortable furniture. And honestly, Kravik couldn't even be mad about it anymore. The universe was a humbling place, especially when you picked fights with species who yawned at 20 times gravity. Lesson learned.